Jan Inge remembers his father.
When talking about my father Per Anger, and in particular his humanitarian work in Hungary during the Second World War, I'd like to start in Stockholm in 1940. He was 27 years old. He had completed his studies with a university degree in law. He was a lieutenant of the Royal Swedish Life Guard in the military, and he was looking for the next chapter in his life. So was his good friend Raoul Wallenberg, a year older, architect. They met regularly in military and social circles in Stockholm. They shared similar values, had similar interests. Swedish independence, neutrality of Sweden, a strong defense, justice, human rights, and so on. In 1942, my father applied for a job at the Foreign Office, was sent to Berlin for training as an apprentice, came back in 1943, passed the exam, became a diplomat, married my mother, and on their honeymoon, they went on my father's first assignment to Budapest in 1943. At that time, Budapest was still rather unaffected by the war. Restaurants were open, the opera was running, soccer was being played, and so on. My father was to handle the trade desk, and he acquainted himself with the other neutral legations in town, first and foremost the Holy See, headed by the nuncio, Angelo Rotta. And he had a very energetic secretary called Gennaro Verolino, who my father worked closely with. There was Karl Lutz from Switzerland. There were representatives from Spain and Portugal as well. There were rumors that Hungary, being an ally of Germany, would start rounding up Jews in the countryside. And there was participation in the war. There were clear directives.
By 1944, the situation had become desperate. The rumors were now truths, and the Nazis were spreading their influence eastward into Hungary.
The Swedes that knew my father from the trade desk that handled Swedish trade and so on came to him. First in line was Hugo Wahl, who said, "Now they're after me. Per, you have to do something." And he issued so-called provisional Swedish passports to the whole Wahl family. This was followed by another 650 or so, 700 all up, my father issued during 44. The Germans, of course, activated themselves when they saw that Hungary didn't participate and their participation in the war was negligible. They didn't fight very well. They didn't round up the Jews as had been directed. And so when they lost their patience and invade Hungary, depose the Horthy government and leader, and install a puppet government called the Arrow Cross. The queues were forming outside the Swedish legation, and it became impossible for them to handle everything. As it often is in a wartime situation, other nations who have evacuated ask those that still remain to be the protective nation. So Sweden was actually a protective nation also for Finland and all of Soviet Union. Obviously, reinforcements were needed, and as we all know, in America, the War Refugee Board was looking for a neutral diplomat that could act with their money and their support under a diplomatic cover to save the Jews of Budapest. Raoul came down in July 1944 and joined the team and saw what my father and the others had done and constructed, of course, the very clever protective document called the Schutzpass. 5,000 had been allowed to be issued by the government, and that grew quickly to 10,000, 30,000 and beyond. There were copies made, forgeries made. It became impossible to control in the end. And the Germans hated the document and chased Raoul Wallenberg and made everything impossible for them to work freely in Budapest at that time. So my father and Raoul together very often went to railway stations trying to save Jews that were stacked inside railway carriages, asking them for Swedish documentation. Very often the document in question could be anything really. They had a Hungarian police officer that they bribed, and he was working for the Swedes. So when the Germans saw this police officer carting away hordes of Jews, they thought they must be going to jail. That's all right then. In fact, they were being directed to the Swedish houses carrying a Swedish flag, making it impossible for the German soldiers to enter. With the money that Raoul had been given from United States, he was able to rent and buy rows and rows of buildings, and they contained tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews. They were given food and medicine, they had soup kitchens and so on. So at one stage, Sweden was the biggest landlord in Budapest.
As the war shifted momentum towards the Allied forces, new concerns arose as the carcass of Europe was being dismembered for the power-hungry victors. Russia wanted Eastern Europe as a reward.
The Germans realized that the end is near, and they started to evacuate. The Swedish legation also evacuated. My father and the minister and the secretaries went underground on the Buda side. Raoul kept to the Pest side. No communications, telephone lines were down. The last time my father saw Raoul was on the 7th of January 1945, and he warned Raoul that now they're after him. He has to follow them and eventually go back to Sweden. No, I can't do that, said Raoul. I must make sure that my protective Jews are given back their property and given medicine and food and so on. I'll talk to the Russians when they arrive. That was the last time the West saw Raoul Wallenberg alive. And the Swedish Foreign Minister Östen Undén asked my father, what do you make of the Raoul Wallenberg case? Well, my father said, it's obvious. They have notified us that they have him. They want a reply. They want to benefit. We could exchange him. We have spies in this country. Let's do something. No. The Swedish government can't exchange lives and deal in human lives. We don't do that. An opportunity obviously lost. My father was then assigned first in Paris, where my brother was born, and then in '56 to Vienna during the Hungarian uprising. He offered to once again assist the Red Cross, the buses that came in with food and medicine, on one proviso, and that was that the Russians gave him free passage in and out of Hungary. They did. On one of those return trips to the Austrian border, they noticed fleeing Jews on the road, stopped the bus and let them aboard. One woman exclaims, Per Anger, do you remember me from Budapest 12 years ago? You've saved me twice. An emotional moment for my father, and he was pleased that he could assist once again. After Austria, my father had 3 more posts, being America, Australia, and Canada. In America, he met Congressman Tom Lantos, in Australia, Professor Frank Vida, and in Canada, the then chairman of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce, George Prager. All Holocaust survivors, all extremely helpful, and all instrumental in making Raoul Wallenberg an honorary citizen of each of these 3 countries. Raoul, of course, was already an honorary citizen of Hungary and Israel. In 1979, Dad retired and could speak freely. He published his book with Raoul Wallenberg in Budapest. He spoke and lectured at universities, was interviewed on TV, talked to ministers, politicians, visited Jewish youth camps, and did everything he could. He became head of the Raoul Wallenberg Association in Stockholm and pursued every possible trace in search of his friend and colleague Raoul Wallenberg. That was in 1979 and onwards. In 1981, there was yet another opportunity where a Soviet submarine accidentally runs aground and violates Swedish territorial waters. My father is one of the first on the phone to say, look, this is a golden opportunity. Let's demand some answers from Russia we've wanted for such a long time. Again, no, Sweden can't handle a human life on one side and a submarine on the other, and try to exchange at the same time. There were many of those opportunities lost. My father, in desperation, tried to get hold of Gorbachev. Impossible. But via Helmut Kohl in Germany, he got the message through to see if an answer could be given finally from Russia. But Gorbachev said, KGB, no, they have their own rules. Sorry, I cannot intervene. In 1985, there were more recognition from abroad. In 82 already, my father was made a righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, of Medal of Merit from Hungary. The Michigan University, where Raoul Wallenberg studied, issued a Raoul Wallenberg medal, and so on. So it was a recognition from abroad, which was then followed by Sweden, who in 2002 decided to give him the Illis Quorum. To further honor my father in the memory of what he did, they issued an annual Per Ange Prize, which was to be awarded first time in 2004. The first recipient was to be nominated by the Ange family, and unanimously we voted for Gennaro Verolino. That's 60 odd years after the event. Would they find him? Would he be alive? Yes, he actually was. You can see my mother handing over the silver globe of the weight of a human heart to Monsignor Gennaro Verolino in front of the powerful Cardinal Sodano and the Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson. We're very grateful for this annual award. We hope that this will inspire future generations to have the courage and act to defeat anti-Semitism and fight for human rights. So in December 2001, we gathered in Budapest. You can see us on Minerva Street in front of the building that once housed the Swedish legation. He took us to the hospital where my sister was born, in fact underground in a bunker during the violent bombing raids. My father on the left, the smaller figure, next to the statue of Raoul Wallenberg on the Buddha side. It was very much the case. My father wanted to emphasize Raoul's role and his achievements rather than his own. The Illis Quorum handed over to my father by the Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson, holding up the flag that had been recovered from Budapest with bullet holes from January of 1945.